Late-night television is built on ease, laughter, charm, and the illusion of safety. The Graham Norton Show perfected that formula, inviting the world's biggest stars to relax, disarm, and entertain. But live television has a way of revealing more than planned. Sometimes, beneath the jokes and applause, something darker surfaces. A comment framed as humor. A belief disguised as honesty. A silence that says too much. These moments were not scripted, and they were not forgotten. They exposed how prejudice can slip through even the warmest spotlight. Here are 6 Graham Norton guests, whose appearances sparked uncomfortable conversations and lasting questions. Number 1. Mel Gibson. Mel Gibson's visit to the couch was shaped less by promotion than by memory. Long before the studio lights came up, his reputation carried allegations of anti-Semitic remarks that had already fractured his standing in Hollywood. His appearance felt like an exercise in restraint, a reminder that charm cannot fully soften a past the audience has not forgotten. The weight he carried into the studio was built over decades. Gibson was once among the most powerful figures in modern cinema, celebrated for performances that radiated conviction and defiance. Films like Braveheart and the Lethal Weapon series turned him into a symbol of rugged intensity, an actor whose on-screen fury felt purposeful, even heroic. That same intensity, however, spilled into real life. When recordings of his off-screen tirades became public, they reshaped how audiences interpreted his persona. Admiration curdled into discomfort. Talent was no longer the only measure. By the time he appeared on The Graham Norton Show, the context had shifted. This was not a victory lap or a casual promotional stop. It was a public reintroduction under watchful eyes. Gibson's body language told its own story. Measured movements, careful pauses, humor deployed sparingly. Norton's warmth steadied the conversation, but the atmosphere never fully relaxed. The laughter came with hesitation, as if the audience were weighing whether amusement implied forgiveness. Years earlier, addressing the controversy, Gibson admitted he had been completely out of control and described his behavior as indefensible. That acknowledgement followed him into every subsequent appearance. It became part of the subtext, shaping how viewers processed even his lightest remarks. He was no longer simply telling stories, he was signaling awareness, attempting to show distance from the man captured on those recordings. What made the moment compelling was its incompleteness. There was no dramatic confrontation, no absolution offered or demanded. Instead, the segment revealed how public reckoning often unfolds, not through arguments, but through restraint. Gibson spoke less, listened more, and allowed silence to do work dialogue could not. It was a performance of accountability, tentative and unfinished. Later, reflecting on his past, Gibson said that unchecked anger can become your identity if you let it. The line reframed his story not as scandal, but as caution. Fame magnifies flaws as easily as virtues, and once exposed, they cannot be edited out. His appearance on Graham Norton's couch did not rewrite history. It acknowledged it. In doing so, it demonstrated a quiet truth about public memory. Time may pass, but it does not erase. It only changes how an audience listens. Number 2. Chevy Chase. Chevy Chase arrived as a comedy legend from another era, but his legacy has grown increasingly complicated. Years of reports about racially insensitive language and behavior followed him into the studio. What once passed as irreverence now read as discomfort, revealing how quickly humor loses protection when cultural standards evolve and accountability enters the conversation. For decades, Chase represented a specific strain of American comedy, sharp, dismissive, and proudly antagonistic. From Saturday Night Live to films like Caddyshack and National Lampoon's Vacation, his appeal rested on arrogance played for laughs. The joke was often that he did not care what anyone thought. That posture worked when audiences read it as satire. Over time, however, stories from collaborators accumulated, describing behavior that extended beyond performance and into real harm. The line between character and conduct blurred. By the time Chase appeared on The Graham Norton Show, those stories had become part of the viewing experience. His presence carried an undercurrent of unease, not explosive, but persistent. The laughter in the room sounded thinner, more conditional. Norton guided the conversation gently, yet the contrast was unavoidable. Chase's comedic rhythm, once dominant, now felt slightly out of sync with the moment. What used to read as fearless now risked reading as dismissive. In response to criticism over the years, Chase has often suggested that comedy requires toughness and that audiences have grown overly sensitive. At one point, he brushed off Backlash by saying that humor is not supposed to be safe. The sentiment, once widely accepted, now lands differently. It exposes a generational divide over who bears responsibility when a joke causes harm, the teller or the listener. What made the segment notable was not confrontation, but contrast. Chase did not explode or apologize dramatically. Instead, the moment highlighted how cultural shifts quietly isolate even the most established figures. His cadence remained the same. The room around him had changed. The audience was no longer laughing automatically. They were weighing context. Later, reflecting on his reputation elsewhere, Chase remarked that he had never tried to be liked. The line functions as both defense and confession. It explains the persona while sidestepping consequence. Chevy Chase's appearance was not about condemnation. It was about time catching up. Comedy that once thrived on indifference now faces scrutiny it cannot outrun. On Graham Norton's couch, Chase did not lose his timing. He lost the assumption that timing alone was enough. Number 3. Jeremy Clarkson. Jeremy Clarkson's public persona has always thrived on provocation. Accusations tied to racially charged comments in his writing and broadcasting lingered over his appearance. The exchange felt less like mischief and more like friction, exposing the limits of shock value when bravado collides with audiences no longer willing to separate entertainment from impact. Clarkson's rise was built on disruption. As the loudest voice on Top Gear, he turned criticism into spectacle, pairing mechanical expertise with a confrontational tone that invited outrage as much as admiration. For years, that formula worked. His appeal lay in saying what others would not, framed as honesty rather than hostility. But repeated controversies, remarks about race and culture that drew public condemnation, began to reframe the act. What once looked like irreverence increasingly resembled disregard, especially as global audiences widened and cultural awareness sharpened. When Clarkson joined Graham Norton, the studio dynamic reflected that shift. The banter moved forward, but with caution. Norton's ease softened edges without erasing them, allowing the conversation to breathe while never quite settling. Clarkson leaned into self-awareness, yet the laughter felt measured, as though the room were testing each beat before granting approval. The moment revealed a recalibration, provocation constrained by consequence, shaped by years of accumulated backlash. In response to criticism over the years, Clarkson has defended his approach as satire, insisting that offense is sometimes the cost of candor. In one public defense, he argued that people should be allowed to laugh at uncomfortable things. The line captures the philosophy that fueled his success and the fault line beneath it. Who defines acceptable discomfort and who absorbs the fallout when jokes misfire in public spaces. What made the appearance resonate was not a clash, but adjustment. Clarkson did not retreat from his persona, yet he lowered its volume. The exchange showed how audiences have changed the terms of engagement. Shock alone no longer guarantees attention. Context now matters as much as delivery, and silence can speak louder than outrage. Later, reflecting on Backlash elsewhere, Clarkson suggested that controversy comes with the territory. The admission felt resigned and revealing. Provocation had become brand, and brand had become burden, something carried into every studio, every interview, every pause between laughs. Jeremy Clarkson's moment on Graham Norton's couch did not end debate. It clarified one. Entertainment, once protected by bravado, now faces audiences demanding responsibility alongside wit. In that studio, provocation met its boundary, not through outrage, but through silence that asked for restraint. Number 4. Morrissey. Morrissey's presence carried a quiet tension shaped by his own words outside the studio. Celebrated for artistic influence, he has also drawn criticism for nationalist rhetoric many consider racially exclusionary. His segment unfolded with distance rather than warmth, reflecting an artist whose opinions have complicated his relationship with the very public that once embraced him. For years, Morrissey stood as one of Britain's most influential cultural figures. As the frontman of the Smiths, his lyrics gave voice to alienation, vulnerability, and outsider identity, shaping generations of listeners who felt unseen. Songs like "There Is a Light That Never Goes Out" and "This Charming Man" built a legacy rooted in empathy. But as his solo career continued, attention shifted from the poetry of his work to the politics of his interviews. Statements interpreted as anti-immigration and nationalistic reframed his image, pulling him away from the inclusive ethos many once associated with his music. When Morrissey appeared on The Graham Norton Show, that history filled the silence between sentences. The exchange was polite, but noticeably restrained. Norton's familiar warmth remained intact, yet Morrissey seemed guarded, offering careful answers without leaning into charm. The audience response followed suit, attentive, respectful, but subdued. It felt less like celebration and more like observation, as viewers measured the distance between the artist they admired and the figure they now questioned. Addressing criticism elsewhere, Morrissey has insisted his views are misunderstood, once saying he felt he was being deliberately misrepresented by the press. That claim has become central to his response, less an apology than a rebuttal. Yet repetition has made that defense harder to separate from consequence. Intent no longer stands alone when patterns are visible. What made the segment linger was its emotional temperature. There was no argument or dramatic rupture. Instead, there was space. Space filled by the audience's awareness of what was not said. Morrissey's silence carried weight. It showed how public trust rarely collapses loudly. It erodes slowly. Later, reflecting on his relationship with audiences, Morrissey remarked that he had always been separate from the mainstream. Once a badge of independence, the line now sounds like resignation. The outsider stance that fueled his art has become a barrier. Morrissey's appearance did not redefine his legacy. It exposed its tension. On Graham Norton's couch, history and belief sat quietly apart, proving that sometimes distance speaks louder than confrontation. Number 5. John Cleese. John Cleese's career was built on satire that challenged authority, but time has reframed that legacy. His outspoken defenses of controversial language have led to accusations of racial insensitivity. On the couch, wit met a different era, revealing how comedy rooted in defiance can struggle when audiences prioritize consequence over intention. Cleese emerged as a defining force in British comedy by puncturing institutions that once felt untouchable. With Monty Python's Flying Circus, he helped dismantle reverence through absurdity, exposing power by mocking its seriousness. Characters like the officious bureaucrat or the self-important intellectual became mirrors held up to society. For years, that approach felt liberating. Comedy was a weapon aimed upward, but as cultural awareness widened, the question shifted from who was being mocked to who might be harmed along the way. By the time Cleese appeared on The Graham Norton Show, the cultural ground beneath comedy had changed. His stories still landed with precision, his timing intact. Yet the room responded differently. Laughter arrived with thoughtfulness, not reflex. Norton's gentle steering kept the exchange light, but the subtext was unavoidable. This was a comedian shaped by an era that celebrated provocation, now speaking to an audience trained to interrogate it. Cleese has repeatedly argued that comedy must retain the right to offend. In interviews, he has warned that creative expression collapses when fear dictates language, once stating that you can't have freedom of speech without the freedom to offend. The statement encapsulates his philosophy. It also reveals the tension at its core. When offense is abstract, it reads as principle. When it lands on lived experience, it becomes personal. What made the segment resonate was its restraint. Cleese did not provoke deliberately, nor did he retreat. Instead, the exchange illustrated a recalibration in real time. Comedy no longer enjoys automatic exemption. The audience listens not only for cleverness, but for awareness. The burden has shifted from pure intention to shared responsibility. Later, reflecting on his relationship with modern audiences, Cleese remarked that satire is meant to make people uncomfortable. The line remains true, but incomplete. Discomfort can illuminate power, or it can reinforce it. The difference lies in context, something today's viewers weigh carefully. John Cleese's appearance was not a reckoning. It was a crossroads, a reminder that humor survives by evolving, not entrenching. On Graham Norton's couch, defiance met reflection, and comedy revealed its next challenge. Not how to shock, but how to listen. Number 6. Sharon Osbourne. Sharon Osbourne's appearance came after public backlash, tied to her defensive remarks widely criticized as racist. Known for directness, she entered the studio under a cloud of scrutiny. The moment reflected how quickly public personas shift when outspoken loyalty is interpreted as endorsement, and television charm gives way to accountability. For decades, Osbourne built her public image on candor. As a manager, media figure, teacher, and judge on talent shows, she cultivated a reputation for saying what others avoided. That bluntness was often framed as honesty, even courage. Audiences came to expect sharp opinions delivered without hesitation. But the same trait that once defined her appeal became the source of her most serious reckoning when loyalty crossed into public defense of comments many viewers found harmful. By the time she appeared on The Graham Norton Show, the context had changed. This was no longer a familiar television personality dropping in for light conversation. The atmosphere was careful. Norton's warmth remained, but the exchange carried gravity. Osbourne spoke with deliberation, aware that every phrase would be weighed. The audience response reflected that shift. Polite, restrained, attentive. The room was listening, not cheering, signaling a broader cultural shift in expectations. In addressing the controversy elsewhere, Osbourne defended her stance by insisting disagreement was being mistaken for prejudice. At one point, she stated that she had been accused of being racist for supporting a friend. The line framed her position as loyalty under attack, not endorsement of harmful ideas. For critics, intent mattered less than impact. That distinction became the center of the debate. What made the moment linger was how visibly the rules had changed. Osbourne was still herself, direct, articulate, unflinching, but the environment no longer rewarded those traits automatically. The exchange showed how modern audiences demand clarity alongside conviction. Silence, once neutral, had become judgment. Television charm could not buffer accountability, even for someone long fluent in its rhythms. Later, reflecting on the fallout, Osbourne said the experience forced her to rethink how words land, not just how they're meant. The comment acknowledged a gap between intention and reception. One audiences now insist public figures confront with care and humility. Sharon Osbourne's appearance did not resolve the controversy, it reframed it. On Graham Norton's couch, personality met consequence. In a landscape shaped by awareness, loyalty alone is no longer a defense. Meaning is measured by impact, and impact now defines legacy. Moments like these remind us why television still matters, not because it entertains, but because it reflects. A couch, a laugh, a pause. Sometimes that is all it takes for history to surface. These guests did not arrive as villains or caricatures. They arrived as people shaped by success, ego, fear, and the slow collision between old habits and new expectations. What played out on Graham Norton's stage was not judgment, but exposure. The quiet kind that lingers after the applause fades. Fame does not freeze time. It moves through it, carrying every word along the way. And audiences change, even when icons resist it. These moments matter because they show culture in motion, negotiating where humor ends, where responsibility begins, and how legacy is rewritten in real time, often in uncomfortable silence. Which moment stayed with you the most? Share your thoughts below and subscribe for more stories where television reveals more than it intends.